section between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Guthrie.
And we have a very fantastic guest today.
We do.
Susan, do you want to do the introductions?
Okay, I'll do that. We have with us Todd Churches, and he's an executive coach. He's the CEO of Big Blue Gumball. He's also an agile professor of leadership at New York University, NYU. And he's the author of a book, and we're going to talk about that, which is called Visual Leadership. So welcome, Todd.
Thank you, Susan. It's great being with you and Guthrie. I've been a longtime fan of your work. I teach your 100 Things books in a couple of my workshops. So it's great to be on with you live. And how to get people to do stuff is another favorite of mine. So
thank you.
Sure.
Yay. I love having fans.
In fact, for those on video,
oh my gosh,
they're always within arm's reach, and they're filled with, especially the presenter book, filled with circles, underlines, highlights. We speak the same language because even though you said to me you're not a visual person, you speak like a very visual person. So we could get into that.
Yeah, okay. I did.
We'll definitely have to do that. I will say we are not bereft
of books. Yes.
Either. So.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and we both recently read the Visual Leadership book, so I know we're gonna talk about.
So let's start here.
Yeah.
Todd, do you want to just give a 1 or 2 minute just summary of the book, maybe why you wrote it, what it is? Because I'm assuming that anyone listening probably has never heard of it before. I just want to give just sort of a
that's
lay of the
not very
land.
Nice. If he's famous, Guthrie.
I don't think people who are watching this have read our books.
Okay.
We don't make any assumptions about our audience.
We need to keep getting the word out. So so the idea behind visual leadership is that and the book, the title is spelled Visual Leadership, one word, with a shared capital L. And the idea behind visual leadership is that who you are and how you lead is inseparable from the lens through which you see the world, based on your background, your upbringing, your life experiences, culture, etc. So when we talk about leadership, which one of the most common words or phrases is to have a leadership vision or to be a visionary leader. And that all has to do with seeing, right? A leader has a picture in his or her mind's eye, almost a mental movie of a future that has not yet happened. And the challenge is, how do I clarify that vision in my own head, but then communicate that vision in a clear and compelling way to other people so it brings it to life? So one of my mantras is, I see what you're saying. How do you get people to see what you're saying? And so as a leader, if you have give people directives or delegate or something and people don't do what you want and expected, whose fault is that? We didn't communicate our vision effectively to say, this is what I envisioned in my mind, what I wanted the outcome to look like. So the backstory is my dream was to work in television. I talk about this in my TED Talk about how I wanted to be either Superman or Batman, but in lieu of that, I would pursue a career in Hollywood. So I grew up in New York. You can probably tell I have a little bit of an accent and I talk really fast, even though I'm an extreme introvert. But I worked in advertising at Ogilvy and Mather Advertising in New York for a year, and then moved out to LA, where I worked a series of jobs in the TV industry. I work in the entertainment field. So I worked for Michael Nesmith of the Monkees. Baby boomers know who he is. My younger students have no idea.
Guthrie, do you know who that is?
So there are 2 quick points. One, I am terrible with names. So I don't like the names of actors and musicians and people I like, bands I currently follow. I don't know the names of the people in the band. I do know the Monkees. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know all the members of the Monkees by name.
Yeah, the Monkees were the wannabe, the aspirational TV version of the Beatles. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
That's when they were created. So I worked for one of the Monkees, and then I worked for Aaron Spelling, just putting scripts together for Dynasty. And then I was in casting at Columbia Pictures Television, comedy at Disney, and then drama program development at CBS. So those were my years in the TV industry before I left for reasons I could go into, but I transitioned into the theme park business as a project manager. And my origin story of my visual thinking, I tell this story in my TED Talk called The Power of Visual Thinking, is I was in China to oversee the installation of a theme park project, and they spoke no English, we spoke no Chinese, so we just started sketching and drawing and pointing. So it became like Pictionary and charades trying to communicate, and yet we somehow managed to do it. And that was like in retrospect, the light bulb moment of, hey, we don't just communicate with words. And I was an English literature major, so I love words. I concentrated in Shakespeare and poetry, but it's the visual images that the words create that gets our ideas out there into the world. So that's I'll stop there, but that's the origin story of how, when I eventually became an executive coach and got into management training and leadership development, I incorporated my visual concepts into my coaching and training practice and my teaching at NYU and Columbia. And that is how visual leadership was born. So I kept talking about it, teaching about it, and people kept saying, you need to write a book to encapsulate all of your concepts in one place. So that's what I eventually did. And my book came out a couple of years ago. So yeah, so that's my origin story that brings us to today.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, as you were talking, I was thinking about a lot of the client work that Guthrie and I do. And it's so common. I mean, I think it is the most common thing, is that people who we work with, who are leaders at their company, they never, started off as leaders, and they didn't even officially train as a leader, right? They're an expert at whatever their particular work is, their area of engineering expertise or whatever it is. Yeah. And then they move up in the company, and now they are a leader, and they are supposed to have a vision, and they are supposed to communicate that. And they may not even realize that there's a way to do that, or there's some ways to do that are really effective. And they're just, they're lacking in these skills. They may not even know that this is a skill they need.
Yeah. Most people, like you were saying, it's like, Bob, you're a top salesperson. You're now our new sales manager. It's like, that's completely different skill set than managing people and leading people who sell, right? And it's in every field, in IT, and it doesn't matter what it is. In sports, right? You're the best athlete, so why don't we make you the coach? That's not the same skill set, right? In fact, in professional sports, most of the best athletes made the worst coaches and managers when they were put in those roles. So it's a pattern. And it really wasn't until when I moved back from LA to New York after 10 years out there working in the entertainment industry. I moved back for personal reasons. And I got a job at a management training company, and they asked me to revamp their mini MBA program. So even though I didn't have an MBA, I have a master's in communication. I had managed people, but I didn't really know what I was doing. So I started reading all these management leadership books, and it was just like amazing that people write about this stuff. So and it's an art, and it's a science, and it's a skill that can be learned and developed over time, right? So that was my realization, and the revelation was that, hey, most people are thrown in without any training, coaching, resources, tools, tips, techniques. So that's what my personal mission statement is helping to make the world a better place, one leader at a time. And to me, everyone is a leader. So when we talk about leadership, it's not just top down, CEO, VP. It really is everyone. Even if you're just leading your own life and managing your own life, you are managing and leading, and you need these tools in order to be successful.
Susan, do you want me to start asking questions? Do you got more questions?
I have one more question, and then I'll let you start asking questions.
That sounds good.
What do you think? You write about a lot of different topics in the book. What do you think is the hardest thing for people to learn and practice or let go of, or, as they are, let's assume that they get the book, that they're intrigued, that they say, yeah, I need to be able to communicate my vision better. What do you think is the hardest thing for people to actually change?
Well, one is, and what's interesting is the biggest point is not actually in the book, and it didn't come to me until after I chose the book cover. So if you look at the book cover, there's a rainbow colored eye, and the rainbow colored eye represents the fact that just as no one in the world has a rainbow colored eye, no one I've ever met, no one in the world sees the world through the same lens that you do. Even if you are identical twins, as my father and my uncle were, raised in the same home, genetically identical, you still see the world in a different way. So that's one of the main things that is really hard for people to grasp. So if you're a leader and you say, well, why didn't you just do this? Or you should have just done that. People didn't see it the same way, right? So I think that's the biggest thing, that realization that everyone sees the world through their own lens. So the rainbow colored eye represents both diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, and the fact that people see things differently. And it represents all the colors of the crayon box, that we need to use creativity and innovation in order to communicate that vision in living color. those of us who grew up with black and white TVs before we finally got color know the difference between, seeing just the essence of something versus, the brightly colored reality of things. So I think that's the biggest thing, is seeing through the lens of others, trying to, when you communicate, to get someone else to see what you're saying, you need to try to see the world through their lens. Speak their language, use metaphors and examples and stories that will resonate with them. So I have a million stories like that. How we kind of make ourselves dinosaurs. In fact, I keep a dinosaur for those watching on video. Here's my dinosaur I keep on my desk to remind me, don't be a dinosaur. So if I'm using an example that was current in the 1980s or 90s, and my 25-year-old student from Beijing, she's going to have no idea. If I make a Seinfeld reference, for example, the Seinfeld fans will get it instantly, right? And it's a bond. Yet it will confuse and alienate someone who doesn't even know who Seinfeld is, right? So I use life is like a box of what? Chocolates. And why is that? Because you never know what you're going to get. Most of my students had never seen the movie Forrest Gump. They had never heard that quote before, so they didn't know box of chocolates was the answer. And then even when I told them that, they didn't understand the reason why. Right. So it's like we use expressions, idioms, metaphors, analogies, stories all the time, but we need to tell those, choose the ones and use the ones that will resonate with our audience, our listener, our reader. So I think that's my long answer to, we need to see things through the lens of others if we really want to be effective and successful.
Yeah, I think I've had an interesting experience recently where I started paying attention to the metaphors and sayings I was using. Yeah. And then once you do, it's good because then you catch yourself. And I had no idea until I really put a spotlight on it, how many references and metaphors I use.
Put a spotlight on it?
Yes, that no one understands. Like, it's just this it's like, if you'd said, do you use a lot of, phrases and metaphors like that? I would have said, oh, no, I don't. And then it was like, oh my God, my whole conversation is filled with this stuff. Yeah. And some of it, I don't even know what it means. So of course, no one else is going to know it. So now I find at least now I still do it. At least now, a lot of times I'll do it and then I'll go, and I'll even say, I bet that metaphor doesn't make any sense, does it?
Yeah, two real life examples. One time at my NYU class, I said something, I got complete silence, and I said something like, it's like Sound of Silence in here. I'm like, does everyone know the song Sound of Silence? And there was silence.
More silence.
And I said
silence.
And I said, who is Simon Garfunkel? They said, a law firm, a management consulting firm. There's no name recognition there. So it's like that one. And then another time I said, I repeated myself a few times. I said, I'm starting to feel like a broken record. My students thought a broken record was like in the Olympics when you break a world record and win a gold medal, because they've never listened to a vinyl album with the needle getting stuck, which is the origin of broken record, right? So like, if you've never had that life experience of that needle getting stuck in the album, then how are you supposed to know what sounding like a broken record means, right? So, but again, with that awareness, then we could, like, in a split second, shift to another. So I use a lot of baseball analogies because I'm a big baseball fan, Yankees and Mets. But if I'm talking to someone from another culture, soccer may resonate more, or tennis is universal to all cultures. So you just hit the pause button for a second, metaphor, and then you shift to what's another analogy. So if I'm talking, nature is universal. So I could say, I want to plant the seed for an idea, branch out in new directions. Let's get to the root of the problem. Let's see which ideas bear fruit. If we do, the sky's the limit. So right there, I just use 5 or 6 different nature, tree-related metaphors that anyone could understand. So that's something we need to think about. Again, are we alienating our audience with our language, or are we creating commonality and connection and understanding?
And generationally, this goes both directions.
Yes.
Because I think everyone just, is enmeshed in their own metaphors and analogies and doesn't realize that.
Yeah.
One of my people might not.
Yeah, one of my students sent me an email the other day, and she signed it capital B, capital R, small s. And I ran it by my wife. I'm like, any clue, any idea? Do you know what that stood for? Capital B, capital R, small s, comma, and then her name?
No, Guthrie,
best regards. It was her in the brief.
I was gonna guess best regards. Yeah. But I had the B and the R, best regards, but then the S I didn't. I didn't know why would you add an S at the end?
I spent like 3 minutes wasted time, they'll never get back trying to decipher, what that meant. But again, just the stories and metaphors, but also the acronyms, the jargon we use.
Yeah,
like I know you have a
definitely
tech following audience. It's all these terminology in the tech field. I teach leadership in the HR master's program at NYU, and we do an exercise where we come up with as many HR terms, acronyms, jargon as we could think of, and say, all right, if you wanted to convince your CFO, some people don't even know what that stands for, to fund an LMS, learning management system.
Yeah.
How are you going to do that unless they see the ROI, return on that investment, right? So it's like we use acronyms all the time, but if we're not, like we're speaking different languages, and yet, so if you want to have impact and influence and get someone to buy in and give you money for something or greenlight something, which again, metaphor, we need to speak a common language. So visual leadership will help you to do that, because you start to see things through the lens of other people. Then you can modify your stories and your metaphors and your examples to find that common ground.
Yeah. All right, Guthrie, I'll pause and let you ask some questions.
Okay. So my first question is, I wanted to talk about we'll start. We'll go a circuitous route, but that's only because you started by talking about people who get promoted.
Okay.
All right. But following up on Susan's question earlier, I remember hearing, and I just want your thoughts on this. People were interviewing famous sports athletes, and why don't amazing athletes make great coaches? And sometimes, you're an amazing athlete because of your physical prowess or whatever, and that wouldn't translate into coaching. But many athletes have incredible drive, see the game at a higher level than anyone else, and should make for fantastic coaches. They understand what it takes to win in this particular spot better than anyone else. And the reason I was told was because they are so transcendently good that the game to them, and this would apply across industry, they're so good at what they do that they just don't understand people who aren't at their level. And so, especially when it comes to training or dealing with people who aren't, the greatest at whatever of all time, they get very frustrated because they don't understand why people don't see it the way that they, in their genius way, doing that things, see that. Does that resonate with you? Does that sound like a reason why people who are good, really, really, really good at a task often don't make the best coaches and leaders?
Yeah, the highest quality talent, they have a certain degree of natural talent, quote unquote natural. They work really hard at it, so they have a level of determination. They practice correctly, but also what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. So the classic example is like Michael Jordan, right? The greatest, top three, if not the greatest basketball player of all time, to just do what I do, right? Or just be like Mike, which is one of the Nike slogans. It's impossible, right? So you need to find your own way to success. You need to find the way that works for you. So whether you're a manager saying, why didn't you do it that way? This is the way I always do it. Because people, again, see things differently. What works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. So the list is lengthy of Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, of top athletes of all time, Hall of Famers, who did not make very good coaches. So you need to be able to explain and articulate. You need to be able to motivate and inspire. Some people may feel demotivated, like I can never be Michael Jordan. So it's like they become deflated. So I think there's a variety of reasons, but and then the flip side of that is, why was someone not a great all-star athlete? They were okay, they were mediocre, but become an amazing manager or coach in baseball or basketball or football? What made them so good? What's interesting, I posed this question in my baseball chapter of the book. Of all the positions on the field, what position did most managers play when they were players? And it is, I don't know how much big baseball fans you are, but it's the catcher. Why is that? The catcher is the field general. The catcher is the only one facing out. Everyone else is facing in, right? The catcher has to have personal relationships and communicate and almost read the mind of the pitcher. You need to be in sync with one another. You need to be thinking about who's not just the next batter, but who's coming up like 2 or 3 batters away. So you need to think strategically, anticipate what's happening in the future. So being a catcher on a baseball field trains your brain to think more strategically. The other positions are more reactive. As a catcher, you need to be more proactive. So just that thinking orientation, you do that for many years, and you're basically the field manager. So to transition to being the manager of a team is not as big a leap. So that's just one example of how our brains need to develop. And also, we talk about management training and leadership development, right? I could teach someone an 8-step process for how to delegate or how to give feedback or whatever, but managers are trained, leaders are developed. So if you just think about the difference between training and development, the implication of development is that happens not overnight, but over time, right? So if someone brings me in and says, we want to do a leadership development program for our people, but we only have Thursday afternoon from 3 to 4, right? You're not going to come out of that 1-hour session as a greater leader. I could teach you a management process, but leadership has to happen over time through practice, through experience, right? Through developing it's more it's the people side of things. So that's what I would say too, is there's the hard skills, which is the technical functional skills of our jobs, but then there's the soft skills, which is your ability to relate to people, communicate, motivate with empathy and compassion, understanding. So that's one of the key differences. We need the hard skills and the soft skills, but just to say to someone, oh, you're great at what you do, whether it's basketball or sales or whatever, and you're now a manager or leader, that's just not the reality of how we get to the higher levels of those management leadership skills. Does that resonate? Does that make sense?
Yeah, Susan, does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it is very interesting that it's like this magical balance, because on one hand, it's like you need to have a certain level of like cachet and respect and buy-in. So if you like stroll into the sales floor, it's like, I'm the new manager of the sales floor. Mm-hmm. I was the worst sales rep for 4 years at a medium sales company. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to tell you all what to do. Right. So like you need a certain level of
proficiency in what you do.
Even though that might actually not have a whole lot of bearing on whether you're actually a good leader or whether you're a good trainer. I think there needs to be some sort of proficiency for people to want to buy in.
Yeah, if you're like, I'm the new head of finance, but I can't do math, I can't do even basic math, I can't add 2 numbers together, that's not good, right? So you need to have I think a foundational, because think about the complexity of work today. As a leader, back in the old days, as a manager leader, you needed to be able to understand and possibly even do the job of everyone who reported to you. That is no longer the case. Now you're more of an orchestra leader. So think about that. The new Leonard Bernstein movie just came out, right? You could conduct an orchestra and not know how to play a single instrument, but you need to be able to read music. You need to have a feel for music and synthesis and bringing people together in harmony, right? So you need to have a certain foundational knowledge and experience. So you don't have to be the best drummer, guitarist, violinist, whatever the instruments are in a band or orchestra, to conduct that orchestra or to lead that band, right? So I think that's another good analogy of you in today's world, you can't, of complexity, you just can't do everyone's job, but you need to be able to get the best and the most out of everyone who reports to you.
Yeah. I think we'll move on unless you want to add anything else about really, really talented people who become coach. One last thought, I guess, that has come to mind. It is very fascinating that many people who are good either trainers, teachers, or leaders usually had a parent who was a coach, a trainer, a teacher, a leader as well. So like a lot of good coaches in sports, their dad was a coach at some level, and they like they maybe tried to become a professional, and maybe they were okay and rode the bench, and then they became this great kind of coach later in life. But it's because they usually, there's a nexus where they learned how to lead and train from someone along the way.
Yeah, in some cases, like if you look at the father of Serena and Venus Williams, right? He was someone who, he was not a great tennis player, and yet he coached his daughters to be 2 of the greatest of all time, right? So whether it's a parent, a teacher, a coach, yes, usually there's some influence, some coach or mentor in your life who took you under their wing and showed you the ropes and also helped you to recognize your potential, right? So that's another thing too. So we could talk for hours about what makes a good coach or mentor or inspirational leader. But some people come to things later in life, some people earlier in life. So Tiger Woods' father groomed him to be a golfer from age 3, if not earlier. So it really is one of those. I think it's all across the spectrum. So it's always interesting to go back, rewind the tape metaphorically, and see where and how people started. So I'm always fascinated by origin stories, whether it's superheroes, like how did Spider-Man become Spider-Man and Superman become Superman, but also for example, both of you are doing something in your lives. Like Susan, how do you get, we could talk about that another time, but your 100 Things books, like how did that come to be? You didn't just wake up one day and say, oh, I just dreamed of 100 things that we need to do, right? Something led to your insights and your awareness and these tips that you wanted to share with the world. So what are your thoughts? Like, how did you get from whatever you were doing before that to coming up with these books that I always I've been keeping on my desk for like 20 years and refer to, right? So they've influenced my teaching and my presenting and my design work and my influencing. So how would you respond to that? Like, how do you get to become the author of these books from where you were before that?
I think there were, it was just recently, I didn't remember who I was talking to, but I kind of had one story I'll tell you I was aware of from the beginning. The other story, I think it took me a while to realize the impact that had. So I was, it's these wonderful random things that happen in your life. And I've studied, creativity and what's going on in your brain during creativity. So it's not as random as people think. But one experience that I had, I was in 2008, I started a blog. This is when blogging was very popular, and I didn't have a blog, and I thought I should have a blog. And so I started a blog and just wrote some ridiculous, boring blog posts, right? And then I was like, okay, now what am I going to do with it? So I hadn't answered that question, but that question was floating around in my mind. And then I saw a movie, and the movie was Julie and Julia, which was some people know about and other people don't. As a movie from around that time period, 2008 or so, about based on a book. So I saw the movie first, then I went and read the book. And it's a true story about a woman who starts a blog based on the fact that she's going to cook every recipe in the Julia Child recipe book. She's going to cook every recipe in there, like over the course of a year, and blog about it. And she does this, and the book and the movie are all about her experience with that, and it eventually leads to her meeting Julia Child, and it also eventually leads to her, having a really well-known, famous blog at the time, and then writing the book and having the movie, right? So it became a big success, the fact that she wrote this blog. And so me having just started the blog, I was kind of fascinated, and I thought about what made her blog like so successful. And what I decided was one thing was she took people on a journey. She said, I'm going to do all the recipes, over the course of a year. So I thought, yeah, people like to go on a journey with you. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, what journey could I take people on? And I thought I could do 100 things that you should know about people. That's what I should, that's a journey I could go on. So I came up with this idea, and I started blogging. That's how the book started. It actually wasn't a book. It was the blog. And of course, about 3 things into the 100, I said to myself, why did I say I was going to do this? Like, can I come up with 100 things? But I just kept going, and I did. I don't know how long it took me, but I blogged about 100 things, and it did have legs, and people did start following it. And then at some point later on, when I was talking to my publisher, because I had already published a couple of books, And we were talking about what book might you want to do next. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll take the 100 things and put them all together in a book. And that's what we did. Now, as we did that, a lot changed and the things changed and I organized them. So it became a book unto itself. But that was how the book came about. So I feel like it was just a collection of a couple things and a couple insights that came together. And I don't know. I think it was maybe the part of, the right thing at the right time.
Yeah.
I've been just thrilled at how successful it's been. And I'll be honest with you, somewhat surprised.
Yeah.
But there was one other thing that had happened years before that I forgot about until recently. I think too much. And I think I've always, thought about and been a seeker and a searcher and, the years ago, and I still do it. What is my purpose in life? Right. I mean, this is just a theme for me. And I remember waking up one day, this is a long time ago. And it was like, I had the answer to what my purpose in life was. I just woke up and there it was. And it was to make all the science about psychology and humans, to make that easy for people to digest who are not, don't have a PhD in psychology and don't have all that academic background. But, it was like everybody needs to know about humans.
Mm-hmm.
And my role will be to communicate that effectively to people who are not specialists.
Yeah. And what's great about your work, it's not just understanding the inner workings, but it's the practical applications. Because I always say there needs to be there's a so what and a so that, right? So when you understand the so what of this is how the brain works, or this is how the brain responds, then what's the so that? You could do what with it, right? So it's one of my sayings is the true value of knowledge is not in its accumulation, but in its application. So I always say that to my students, anything we talk about, what's the real life practical application? How do we turn ideas into actions and actions into results? So in your book, you do it. One, it's you simplify complexity. It's also very visual, use of color and charts, and you can see like in your book. Here are some of my sketches where I sketch out your ideas in a visual way, because that's my way of mentally processing
it. Yeah.
So that's just a real life example. That's on page 107 of your people book. So but that's great. So it's like you definitely achieved your purpose, with me at least, in doing that. So but that's great. I love hearing origin stories like that. Like how did you? I was curious too. Was it like, oh, I have 99, I need one more, or was it like, oh, I have 103, we're gonna have to cut these? So because 100 is such a perfect round number. So
I believe she got to 87 and was like, oh God, I need 13 more.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I went probably to 110 and it was like, okay, now too many. I gotta say, it was like, why did I do 100 things? You got to hit exactly 100. And so there was a lot of like, all right, I'll combine these
about
two.
100 things that you need to know.
Somewhere around 100 things that you need to know.
Well, for me, one of my goals, and this is since 1998, since I got addicted to business books, I've been reading an average. For a while, I was reading even more than that, but I read an average of one business book a week, which is 52 a year. So for this year, 2023, it's now early December, I just hit I think 55. So I flew past my 52.
Oh, wow.
So now what my year-end list, I'm going to try to get to 60. So I'll say the 60 books I read, or am I going to cut out 8 that didn't really, I read them, but so I need to always figure out, because my last couple of years I had my 52 books, although the year before I had 101 books that I read. That was during the pandemic when I had a lot more on my hands. So so I figured if I did 101 that year, then if I ever don't get to 52, I have like a backlog, right?
Right.
It'll still average out to 52, one a week over and I started that addiction back in 1998. So I'm on 25 years.
That's a lot of books.
Yeah, it's over. I wasn't a math person, but it's 1,250.
All right, question for you. Yeah. Rough percentage. What percentage of them would you say are like really good and you would recommend to people and people should read?
I mean, it's almost like a bell curve. A small percentage are amazing, life-changing. I'm gonna remember this one. I'm gonna reread it and keep it on my book stand. Others are like, okay, skimming this is enough. I get it. One of the challenges with leadership, the differences between most leadership is they just change the metaphor, right? Or they come up with the 7 ways to do this, or the 21 things you need to. But there's nothing new in that way, and that's why I hope visual leadership, or that's the feedback I get. It's a new way of looking. No pun intended, a new way of looking at leadership, because it's being more aware of the visual components. And I break it down into 4 categories using visual imagery and information we could take in through our eyes. So that could be props, it could be drawings, PowerPoint slides. Category 1 is visual imagery. Category 2 is using mental models and frameworks. Category 3 is using metaphor and analogy. And category 4 is using storytelling and humor, if the humor is appropriate. So, those are my 4 categories. So just getting people to think in those terms and speak in those terms using visual imagery and visual language is a new way. For a lot of people, they say, oh, I've kind of been doing this, but I never had a language around it before. I never realized I was doing it. So with this awareness, you become more aware of what other people are doing, and you could be more strategic. So I was talking to a coaching client. I showed you my dinosaur, but I have a million props on my desk. So one of my clients was talking about something. I said, well, you're not addressing the elephant in the room, because he was avoiding like the main thing we weren't talking about. So I just held that up. One of my clients was speaking, not being very flexible. I was saying you need to be more like Gandhi.
Okay. So you need Guthrie, I need. Can we put some props in our budget, because I need some of these props. This is great.
I'm curious about something. I need to ask you.
For those listening at home, not watching. Todd has been pulling on screen a collection of various toys and stuffed animals, all of which are applicable to the topic in question.
And many of them are chapters in my books. Similarly, I don't know if you have Baskin Robbins out there, but we want to give people a little pink spoon sample of what we're talking about, so that they will come back and want to get the whole cone or the half gallon worth of what we're offering. So again, I could go on for hours, but again, I always say to my client, there's no magic wand. You actually have to do the work. So sometimes I'll wave my magic wand and say, if this isn't going to happen magically, you need to actually put your head down and do the work.
I like the props.
Yeah. So again, it's visual. In my TED Talk and in my book, I talk about attention, comprehension, and retention. Attention is how do you get people to focus. Comprehension is how to get people to understand, and retention is how to get people to remember. So when you use visual imagery and visual language, it captures people's attention. It's like, okay, I get it, and they're not going to forget it. When you do something that's goofy or fun, that's an example of incorporating humor, if and when appropriate, into something, and you're just not going to remember, your executive coach just held up a little toy dinosaur or a Curious George doll. And imagine keeping that on your desk as a tangible reminder every day that I need to be more curious, I need to be more flexible, I need to not be a dinosaur. So that's how the brain works. So if you could translate an abstract concept or goal into something tangible, concrete, and visual, and if possible humorous, it's going to have greater impact, and it's actually going to change your behavior and change your outcome. So it's not just frivolous or fun. There are real practical applications to what we're talking about.
I have a client that I'm working with, and Guthrie was actually the one that came up with a metaphor that I then used in my conversation with the client, because I was struggling with an interaction, and he said, this person keeps bringing you a dead mouse to deal with. It's like this. It was this person that kept bringing me things that they would lay on my doorstep, and then I'm supposed to problems that I'm supposed to fix, but it's not my job to fix them. But I would feel like I should fix them, and so he said to me, "Stop picking up the dead mouse," and so then it was like, oh. Yeah, which really helped me a lot. Yeah. So then I had one of my clients who I thought was doing the same thing, and I told her the dead mouse story. And then I surprised her. I sent her a stuffed mouse,
That's great.
And she now keeps that on her desk, and every now and then she'll reach for it and she'll wave it on camera. She's like, I'm not going to pick up this dead mouse.
See, you are a visual person, because that's a great example of doing that. Because
really helpful.
There's a classic Harvard Business Review article. One of the their biggest reprints. It's called Who's Got the Monkey, and the monkey represents a task or burden similar to the dead mouse. It's like when, as a manager, you delegate to someone, you give them the monkey. Then they come back to your office and say, I'm stuck, I can't do this. Do you train and coach them and leave them with the monkey, or do you say, all right, just leave it here and I'll do it? And you have 5 people reporting to you who all come back to you with their monkeys. And then what happens? You have all these monkeys climbing on your desk and rummaging through your papers and hanging on your shoulders. When do you get your own work done? You didn't use that as, a training and coaching opportunity. So that monkey is very similar to the dead mouse, right? It's kind of like the visual metaphor that is brings things to life, and it's a great reminder of something that, you know, it's a great way to break patterns. It's a great way to get into good habits. One of my clients during the pandemic, people were wrestling with when they were on Zoom all the time, and, you know, the work-life balance thing, people felt like they were always working all the time. This client, their color was orange. They sent everyone in the company a pair of orange slippers that when you're at work, quote unquote, wear the slippers when you're at your desk. And then when you're off work, you just tuck the slippers under your desk and you say, I'm done for the day. So that's a tangible reminder of when you're, quote, at work. So even if you took the afternoon off, you may do 2 hours of work at night, put those slippers on. It's like, you know, the magic slippers from the Wizard of Oz, only they were orange, fluffy slip-ons. But just that, and another company sent out wristbands. Like when you're on work, that people felt like they were like shackles, and it was like there was a negative association with that. Like wearing, but again, it was like we don't have an on or off switch. So they needed some kind of symbolic, tangible, visual way to represent when I'm working and when I'm not. So whatever works. But again, that's an interesting use of color. And we didn't even get into color and how color factors in. But you know, all of these things we're talking about are great ways to change behaviors, create insight, etc.
Yeah. All right, Guthrie, did you have another thing you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. Let's see. Which way to go? Because we don't have forever.
Were there any particular chapters that resonated with you personally? It's always interesting to me to hear, like, oh, I love this one, or this one really hit me. So it's always curious to hear if there was anything that really jumped out at you.
Yeah, I have some notes here. I liked two things in particular. I liked small little moments. I liked the 5 frogs on a log riddle. Okay, that's a class. That was great.
Here's my frog.
Yeah, the 5 frogs on the log was good. Which I don't know if you want to tell it, you can. Otherwise,
yeah, the very quick version is you have 5 frogs on a log. One decides to jump into the pond. How many are left? Still 5. He decided to jump into the pond, but he didn't actually do it. Right. So there's a huge difference, a huge leap you need to take from deciding to do something and actually doing it. So that's that. In essence, I didn't come up with that, but that's a metaphorical tale or story that really resonates with people. The decision is just part one. Then you need to actually act on that decision.
Another phrase that I thought was great was post-traumatic boss disorder. That's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you bosses, insert stress there, but yeah, it's the fact that when we have worked for abusive bosses, I don't know if you've had any. I've had way too many when I worked in Hollywood, but those feelings linger with you for many years.
Yeah,
one of the chapters that kind of bookends a chapter earlier in the book about the boss, my love letter to horrible bosses. I worked for a TV network, and I felt something whip on my head, and my boss had thrown a box of pens at me because they were not the ones she wanted. So instead of I ask my students when I teach feedback, might there be any other way to communicate to your employee that they also thing? It's like, no, throwing it at their head. That's pretty much it. That's the only way they're going to learn and not do that, right? As it turned out, I did all of the right ones. The supply room sent up the wrong ones, but she didn't want to hear about that. But the abuse, your body, it stays in you for many years to come. And I tell the story about how I had a really horrible, abusive boss who made my life a living hell for a long time. And then I was in a meeting years later at a conference, and I turned around, and there she was. And my body reacted as if she was still my boss. I actually started to get nauseous, shake, sweat. I actually had to get up from so here I am, like I'm 55-year-old at the time college professor, and yet my body reacted as if I was a little kid who who was re-meeting an abusive parent or something like that. So just our body and our mind, it's just in there. So or you could be the opposite, the type of boss And this relates to another chapter. What is your leadership weather report? Are you a cloud of doom and gloom or a ray of sunshine who lights up the room, even on Zoom? Right. So some people walk into the room and it's like hell froze over, right? And everyone puts their head down and they can't wait for them to leave. And other people have a boss or a leader who walks in and the party's starting, everyone's energized and excited and inspired. So which boss are you? Because you create a climate in your environment and you create weather that will impact other people. So those, the post-traumatic boss disorder is, these memories linger years after they happen, whether they're negative or positive. So which leader do you want to be?
Do you know the book, The Body Knows the Score?
I've heard of it, but I've never read it.
Yeah, it's a really good one. And it's all about how our bodies hold in that kind of trauma.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Guthrie.
All right. I think we got one more question here that I'll ask, and then we'll start to wrap it up. So the question is, what are your thoughts about the idea that people will come up with different solutions? Those are the same person would come up with different solutions based on the medium that they're expressing in. So if you have someone solve a problem with words, it would spark a different creative route than if you had a person solve it with visuals or dance. So, for example, what does it look like if you do the regional sales back of the napkin example that you have in your book? Mm-hmm. But instead of drawing it, you have to come up with a solution to the regional sales problem through physical movement, like interpretive dance. Is some of the advantage of visual of doing things visually, shaking things up, and people who always solve problems in one medium, having them think about it and solve it a different way?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, while my focus is on the visual, we really need to use all of our senses, right? There's that acronym VARK, and I think, Susan, it's in your book, or you may have had the VAC version. VARK is visual, auditory, reading, writing, and kinesthetic, right? So we take in information visually through sight and pictures, auditorily through what we hear, through reading and writing, which is more text-based, and then kinesthetic, which is about movement, feeling, and touch, as you're talking about with interpretive dance. When you leverage all of those modes, and sometimes it's become known as the myth of learning style. So people are not like, oh, I'm an auditory learner or you're a visual learner. Our brains are wired for all of these. So when we leverage all four of these modalities, we will have greater impact in terms of attention, comprehension, retention. So that's why I'd say that in answer to your question, if we try different things and use different modes, if we could draw something out, if we use sculpture, if we use, whatever, dance, we will probably come up with different solutions because we're leveraging different parts of our brain. And when we do it together, there's that acronym TEAM, as a team, together, everyone achieves more. We leverage the collective brain power. It's almost like, the phone a friend or the, crowdsourcing, right? So when we get the more minds we have, sometimes it's too much, but at least in terms of idea generation, we will come up with more approaches and possible solutions than one person just sitting, staring at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen, trying to come up with an answer. So I think that's why with that napkin sketch story, my client, who was an expert in his area, couldn't see a solution that I saw in 30 seconds because I was detached from it. I didn't have the emotional investment. I didn't have all the details. In fact, I almost didn't even suggest it because I thought it was so obvious. He would have seen that. Why? And the whole thing, I'm an idiot for suggesting something so simplistic. That turned out to be the solution to his problem. So just getting an outside voice. That's why people bring in consultants like me as coaches and to see things from a new lens without, with less of an internal bias. We all have our own biases, but I won't have the same biases that you will because I'm not as close to it and I'm not as emotionally invested in it. So that's what I would say is, try different approaches, different things. I use like some of the props I showed you. Sometimes I'll do a workshop. I'll put all the props on the table and I'll say, grab any two randomly, join them together and say, what do they have in common? It could be size, it could be color, it could be thematic, but it just leverages different parts of the brain. Like if I say the word apple, Guthrie, what's the first thing you picture? Apple.
Oh, you're on mute.
It's a red apple.
Okay, and Susan, apple.
Yeah, it was a physical fruit.
Okay,
yes, physical fruit.
Some people picture the Apple logo that's on their computer, on their iPhone. Other people picture a green apple. Some people picture an apple orchard or an apple tree because they went apple picking a few weeks ago. So just the word apple And is it a Macintosh? Is it a Smith? Is it a Grant? Whatever the different types are. So if I say, get me an apple, and I need it in a half hour, you may or may not bring back the apple I wanted and needed. You didn't know what I wanted it for. Is it something I'm going to eat? Am I going to use it to sketch?
And then you're going to throw it at me.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to get a bunch of apples thrown at you.
Exactly. So that's the thing. It's like, again, it's very clear in my mind. If I say I need an apple, you don't know what I need it for, what kind I need, etc. But that's what managers do. They say, and one of the stories in my book, I tell ice, rice, or mice. Has this ever happened to you? I was in a restaurant and I asked for some more ice because I needed it for my drink, and they brought me a bowl of white rice because they thought I said rice. So if I wanted ice and you brought me rice, whose fault is it? I always say the burden of communication is on the communicator. And then what could I have done differently? If I held up my glass and said, can I have some more ice, and pointed to it, they wouldn't have put white rice in my glass, right? But, with accents, people hear what they expect to hear very often, right? So we need to say, all right, I'm talking to a waiter. I already had rice. And I said, can I have some more rice? Might he bring me the wrong thing? Yes. How can I communicate that clearly? And again, that was a minor thing with very low cost. But the story I tell in the book is from one of the theme park companies I worked for. We produced something that was not the right thing that the client wanted, and it cost us about $50,000 to redo it. So there could be high stakes to a miscommunication or a misunderstanding.
Yeah, and I find with the different styles that you talked about, each person tends to, either out of habit or what we think works best for us, we tend to communicate, with one or two of them and forget about the others. And so one thing is that, continually realizing that the people you're communicating with, they might, so I'm very auditory, but the person I'm communicating with might not like information auditory. So I need to adjust, but also, and I think I mentioned this to you the first time we talked, Todd, that for me, communicating visually is not my, quote, natural or habitual style. But when I do that, it changes the way I think.
Yeah.
So it's useful not just for me to communicate because other people might like to get the information visually, but because it changes my own thought process if I switch it up.
Yeah, metaphorically, the left brain, right brain thing, you could be a heavy, I remember left brain, linear and logical, right? So that's the words and numbers side. Leverage that, right? I always remember left brain, logical, right brain, rhythm. That's the music and the creativity side. If as a left brain person, if you leverage the right brain, you'll come up with more ideas, you'll think differently, think, right? So yeah, that's a great point. It's not just for other people, but for ourselves to see things from different angles and different perspectives and find the color, alternatives, something, you may always be doing something in blue, but what if you did the red version or the green version or the purple version? How would that change, symbolically? So like another prop I keep on my desk is this traffic signal, which represents stop, start, and continue. So I may say to a client, what's working that you want to continue doing? What's not working that you need to help to stop? And what are some things that you'd like to start doing, right? So just if a client keeps this on their desk, and it's a stress toy, so you could actually squeeze it when you're very stressed about making these changes.
All right, wait a minute. How big is this desk?
It's not that big, but I have a.
Because you've held up in this conversation, you've held up at least 12 props. So if Guthrie, if we're going to get me some props, and I think I really want some props, well, I think we're going to have to get me a new desk first. So I
should do. You just gave me an amazing idea. I could buy all of these, package them as a visual leadership prop collection.
Would you please?
Ooh, that's good.
Would you please? I will sign up to buy the first. Yeah. The first box.
It could be like $50 worth of stuff. I could sell it for $250. I'll give you the discount, the free version. But like this one, this is one of my favorites. Like if we keep our minds closed and say, I'm not a visual thinker, you're going to be stuck there. But if you expand your mind and say, maybe there's potential, creates all this space.
All right, he's holding up one of those kind of toy things.
It's called a Hoberman Sphere, is what the official name is.
I love the props and the toys. Yeah. Todd, this has been so great. I feel like we could probably keep going for like ever. So, we won't keep going forever. Let's just remind people the name of the book is called Visual Leadership. And where can they buy it?
Anywhere books are sold, mainly Amazon, but they just started carrying it at Barnes and Noble here in New York. I'm not sure if
Oh,
they
how
have any
fun.
others.
That's
That's
fun.
fun. Yeah, so I walk into my local Barnes and Noble. There's one 3
Yeah.
blocks away, and I visited. I've sold a few copies, saying to people, "Hey, have you ever heard of this one?" So whenever my wife can't find me, I say, "Just assume I'm at the Barnes and Noble selling copies." So I'm stalking people. But yeah. But it's not in every Barnes and Noble. So Amazon is the most likely, but it is in a few other
Okay.
places as well.
And if
it's
people want to get hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
One is to just visit my website, toddchurches.com, and it's CHERCHES. And I also have my company website, bigbluegumball.com, which is more for my consulting and training practice. But visually, toddchurches.com, you'll find you'll be able to download my list. You'll get a pop-up to download my list of the 52 books that had the greatest impact on my work. And Susan, you're on that list, the 100 things.
Hey, I made it on the list.
Yes. And yeah, but also connect with me on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. It's great. So just say you saw me on Susan and Guthrie's show. Just drop me a note, and happy to connect and continue the conversation on social media on LinkedIn.
So great to have you on.
I just really love the idea of the visual idea of a bunch of sort of very stuffy business people in suits and stuff trying to brainstorm how to get 4% higher annual sales through interpretive dance in like some terrible corporate room.
You hold on to that thought.
That's just a fun thought.
We'll have you lead the dance. How's that?
Yeah, and you let us know, or tap dancing, whatever kind of dancing you want to use. Because people do tap dance around an answer or response, right, when they're not sure what they're gonna.
Solving UX research problems through tap.
But real life example, I was doing a workshop for a group of 20 CEOs here in New York, and the exercise, and if you want to look up this article, it's on Inc. magazine. It's called "Can You Draw What Your Company Does?" And that's the exercise. Executives have to get up on a piece of paper or the whiteboard and literally, as if they're playing Pictionary, draw what it is that your company does. How is it, and how is it different from and better than the competition? And in that article, I won't tell the whole story, but you'll get the story of how that completely changed the way this company focused their attention and represented. They came up with a metaphor. So sometimes it's linear and literal, like here's a process map or a storyboard, and other times people come up with a creative metaphor that represents, in the process of explaining. And 2 of them were friends for like 15 years, and one of them said to the other, until you mapped out what you do and your supply chain and everything else and explained it to me, I really had no idea. Now I understand where your problems are, and now I can help you. Because before that, it was just a very abstract, I'm struggling with this. But now I see where there's a break in the chain. So just, again, there are practical applications. But imagine, you have a group of CEOs and you start handing out crayons and colored markers and big pieces of paper. The initial reaction is not always enthusiastic. But by the end of the 10 minutes of drawing, people are like, can we have some more time? Can I have some more colors? And we hadn't really talked about, but the idea of play, play as it relates to innovation and making things fun, because business is serious. There are risks involved, but if you can lighten the mood, then it leads to better ideas, greater ideas. I was once facilitating an innovation workshop, and I was doing some warm-ups and break. It was a full-day thing, and the CEO looked at his watch and said, we've been here 45 minutes, and we haven't come up with one new product idea yet. And like, he was so impatient to get to the end of the day. And I said, trust the process. We'll get there, but it's not going to happen. If it was that easy, you wouldn't even needed me, right? To do this. So you need to be patient. You need to play. You need to have fun. You need to try new things in different modalities. Otherwise, it's the Einstein quote, right? If we keep doing the same thing the same way and expecting a different result, that's just not going to happen. So.
Right. Great. Love it. Thank you so much, Todd, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let's stay in touch.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you.